Welcome. San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas welcomes you to this Sunday service. We believe in the inherent dignity and worth of all, whoever you are, wherever you are, you truly are welcome here. I'm Jana, your lay leader for this service. I have been new to UU and I have found connection with my community and my beliefs by joining San Gabriel. Our Soul Matters theme for the month of November is Holding History, and we also celebrate Native American Heritage Month. These subjects will be woven not only into our weekly services, but also into our messenger. That's our email. So be sure to read your weekly emails. Reverend Lou Snead is today's speaker. He is a retired Presbyterian minister who actively participates in our congregation. For this post-election day service, he will address the topic, Encouragement for Losers. In keeping with our tradition of starting our services, let us now light our chalice. Feel free to light yours at home if you have one. We gather again today as a company of pilgrims on a journey of faith, united by a vision of compassion and equity. In a world that is often set on edge, living by self-interest and grabbing for power, wealth, and fame, we come together to reclaim a hope for a better world, to find strength for resisting the darkness of hatred, fear, and pride that tramples the weak, the enemy, and the other. May the light of this chalice remind us of our common efforts to bring more light into this world to subdue the darkness in it. Let us walk together into the light of this faith, sustained by grace, gratitude, and love.
Good morning. It's good to be with you here at San Gabriel UU Fellowship once again. Let me share with you today something of an observation and a confession, and that is that many of us who have found a spiritual refuge in the UU faith tradition are prone to feeling a lot of despair right now about the absence of compassion and justice among so many of our citizens and in so many of our state houses, and the unwillingness of so many of our fellow citizens to get vaccinated against this COVID pandemic. I'm among those who sometimes gets depressed about the intractable, or at least it seems, amount of identity politics and what's called cultural wars. Many of us simply don't understand the ideological mindset or the fears that are driving all of these unsubstantiated allegations about voter fraud, this xenophobia about people coming to the U.S. looking for work, especially when we have so many low-wage jobs available right now, or the educational bans against teaching the history of racism in this country, or now the removal of laws that protect women's reproductive rights, and denials about climate change, and a host of all kinds of issues being contested today in the public square. You can get down about it. Even more discouraging, I think, for some of us, is the amount of antagonism and animosity that seems to be expressed by many against some of the values that we hold as being near and dear to us. All of this discouragement, I found, gets amplified when we are asked to go to the polls and cast ballots for candidates in elections, only to discover when they count the results that once again we seem to be on the losing side of an election. So I want to explore with you today just briefly, where can we find encouragement when we realize that we are often on the losing side of so many cultural, social, and political issues today? We will look at that this morning.
Our affirmation reminds us of who we are together in fellowship and our sacred covenant to each other. Please join as we say our affirmation. The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you today. I've got a wonder box over here, as I typically always do. As we share in our wondering, we are living out our third principle to accept one another and encourage one another to spiritual growth in our congregations, because we hear what the other might think is in here. What could possibly be in here? Tell someone near you what you think. I think the clue today is no noise at all, maybe a little slight shaking. All right. I wish I could hear your guesses. What have we got? Something bright yellow, maybe looks familiar. It is our Side with Love shirt. It says San Gabriel on the back. This shirt is a sign of our commitment to justice, and as Dr. Cornel West said, justice is what love looks like in public. I have often said that this yellow shirt is one of the best things that's ever happened to Unitarian Universalism, and that it helps us find one another in public settings and gives us a group identity, making us easily recognizable to others. Reverend Lou is speaking to us today about the spiritual grounding of our justice work. And I've got a story about that given to me by Michelle some time ago. Today's service is finally the right time to share it with you. It's called
Love is Powerful by Heather Dean Brewer, illustrated by Leun Pham.
Mari spilled her crayons onto the table. They made a messy rainbow. "What are we coloring, Mama?" she asked. Mama smiled. "A message for the world." Mari ran to the window and pressed her nose to the glass. Far below, people walked in different directions. Buses, cars, and taxis honked and grumbled down the busy street. Mari asked, "How will the whole world hear?" "They'll hear," Mama said, "because love is powerful." Mari climbed onto her Mama's lap. The crayon smelled sharp and new. Mama used one to write some letters. Even though Mama's words stretched across the poster, they would be too small for the world to read, Mari thought. Mari picked up a crayon. She made her own sign. She imagined her friends in their apartments across the city. Grandma and Grandpa a plane ride away, and all the people in the other countries. Mari wondered, how will the whole world see our message? Mama hugged her close. They'll see, she said, because love is powerful. Mama handed her a coat, and then they both laced up their shoes. Mari tucked the posters under one arm and held Mama's hand with the other. They slipped through the elevator doors. Down, down, down they went, all the way to the lobby. Mari hopped onto the sidewalk, then stopped and looked up. The street was packed with people, more people than she'd ever seen in her entire life. Mari tugged on Mama's arm to ask her to kneel down. Then she whispered in Mama's ear, "Mama, it's so loud. There's so many people. They won't hear our message." Mama said, "Oh, they will, little Mari." Mama lifted Mari up, and for a moment she felt like she was flying. On top of Mama's shoulders, Mari could see the crowd swell for blocks. Hundreds and thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of people marching down the street. Some held signs like Mari's, all saying different things. Everyone cheered as they walked together. Mama joined them. Mari bobbed above the crowd like a canary fluttering over the trees. She felt as tall as one of the buildings. Mari raised her sign for everyone to see. Even though she was small and the crowd very big, so big she didn't think anyone would hear, she called out her message. Through the roar, her voice was heard and someone shouted the message back. Mari yelled again and more joined in. Again, she yelled the message. This time, when the crowd called back, Mari's message rumbled down the street and echoed off the buildings. It was as loud as breaking waves. Love is powerful. A note from Mari. I was only 6 years old, but I knew why we were there. We went to the Women's March, along with hundreds of thousands of people, that cold day to show that love really is powerful. When we joined the crowd at the march, I couldn't see that well and was tired of walking. My mom lifted me up onto her shoulders. I called out, "Love is powerful," and to my surprise, the people close to me repeated it back. Each time I said it, more people joined in. At that moment, I really felt its power. One voice can be heard, and one voice can make a difference. Don't be afraid to speak up, and remember to speak up not just for yourself, but for other people too.
Did you hear a different voice for that story? My colleague at First UU in Rochester, Minnesota, Amy Nelson, kindly gave permission to use her recording this morning. In the story, Mari found the strength to share her message through encouragement from her family and those around her. And her message of love is powerful is a reflection of Unitarian Universalism. As our Side with Love campaign states, UU's affirm unconditional universal love as a foundation and grounding for our actions in the world. From this grounding, we strive to be of service to our communities and advocate for change on local, state, national, and international levels. We'll talk more about how our love in the larger world motivates us to create change in RE time today. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
So how do you deal with the disappointments or the frustrations or the hopelessness that you may feel, like I often do, when you discover that our UU values are sometimes completely dismissed, ignored, or opposed in public policy conversations and decisions that get made today? Do you just want to put your head down and cry? And when you read or you hear about the actions of the Texas state legislature to gerrymandering voting districts or let people carry guns anywhere they want, are you tempted to turn to antidepressant medication or to alcohol to ease this disillusionment that we may feel about the direction that our country seems to be going in these days, or the misinformation and disinformation that seems to be passing around and people are promoting? I realize it's become exceedingly difficult in these days when America is so ideologically polarized to feel like we are making a positive difference in this world, particularly when it comes to our spiritual and political values, which seem to be under assault. I remember hearing John Wesley, the 18th century circuit riding founder of the Methodist Church, who went around the countryside to talk to people, and he would always ask everyone that he met, "How is your soul?" I take it that he was deeply concerned about the spiritual well-being of his parishioners, especially at a time when there were so many plagues, the famine, unemployment, warfare, and civil unrest that was raging back in his day. In the spirit of Wesley's pastoral concern, I want to ask each of you this morning, how is your soul? How are you managing? How are you coping with the cultural divide that's in our country today, when some of our neighbors are complaining about vaccinations or mask mandates and saying these infringe on their rights? And we still have a former president who was ousted by, what he says is voter fraud, and so many believe that. And we got people who think that global warming is just a hoax. And now we have a governor and the legislature who think that illegal immigrants are the most serious problem our state and our nation faces today. These are discouraging times for some of us who believe in science, who want to trust that our government institutions can do something right rather than believing in conspiracy theories, who think that teaching our children history about racism is critical to overcoming lingering racial inequalities, and who see these contradictions and notions about the sacredness of life when laws against abortion are more important than stopping what I think is state-sanctioned revenge in the death penalty. For many of us living here in Texas, particularly right now, can be depressing when the dominant political party in this state, at least, is determined, it seems, to outlaw any legal provisions aimed at protecting or helping to marginalize the vulnerable and the disenfranchised in our state. It's more than a sobering recognition that nearly half of our country has fallen prey these days to xenophobia, white replacement theories, unrestricted access to guns, religious absolutism, and fears about socialist policies they say are ruining the well-being of our country and destroying personal freedom and privileges. So how are you dealing with your soul, with your spiritual confidence that this moral arc, we say, is still bending towards justice, with the direction of our nation being headed, it seems, in another direction, and with the health of our nation's institutions in question? In a recent issue of Time magazine, there was an article about the rising tennis star Naomi Osaka, who bowed out of the Summer Olympics this year for what she said were mental health reasons. From interviews with Osaka about her decision, the writer of this Time article concluded that there are times for many of us when it's okay not to be okay. Fellow Olympic champion in gymnastics Simone Biles also withdrew from competition this year because she said she wasn't feeling right with her soul, meaning, I take it, about her attitude about performing the feats that she was trained to do. The same spiritual uneasiness has now showed up among essential workers who no longer want these low-wage jobs that jeopardize their health and keep them from supporting the well-being of their families. The combined effects of dealing with all of this COVID healthcare crisis, the accompanying financial pressures that many are feeling from that, along with the traumas of racial injustices, you just about discouraged many of us about the shape of our country, even though we're living in what's the most prosperous nation on this planet. Mental health professionals now report a marked increase among people needing or seeking help to cope with stresses and to reclaim a measure of hope about their own future well-being. According to a recent survey by the American Psychological Association, they said, quote, many mental health professionals and experts have been saying since the start of this pandemic that the emotional and social health of most every age group in America today is suffering what they call compounding stressors in our lives. They say these compounding stressors have serious health and social consequences if we don't act now to reduce those. These stresses have started showing up 7 months into this pandemic health crisis, with increasing numbers, especially of young people suffering from depression and anxiety. So that today, nearly 1 in 5 adults are saying their mental health now is worse than it was 2 years ago. The survey data that was reported indicated that this is true, especially among younger generations, where 34% of the so-called youngest age group, the Gen Xers and Zs, were the worst, followed by the millennials at 19%, but only 12% of baby boomers in my age categories, and only 8% of those older were saying they felt this much stress. The Generation Z's adults are also more likely to report experiencing common symptoms of depression, with more than 7 out of 10 noting that in the prior 2 weeks, they felt so tired that they almost had to sit around and do nothing. They felt just unmotivated even though some said they were just restless. Some said they had a hard time concentrating, or they felt lonely or unhappy. While many of us older folks, I suspect, have worried mostly about health concerns from COVID virus, it seems that many others are dealing with financial and family disruptions, dealing with how to deal with education of their children safely. And beyond this, most of us who belong to what we might call progressive religious and political organizations feel the discouragement of being on the losing end of all of these public conversations going on the social and spiritual health of our nation. As one of the progressive voices in the media said recently, I am at a point where my civic engagement is suffering because every time I turn on the news or pick up a newspaper, I learn that my values, my aspirations, and my hopes for America have been undermined by angry white people who feel that they've been losing out to people less deserving than they are. So are you feeling discouraged like this? If you do, you're not alone. And it's okay not to be okay about the way things are today. I remember a mental health professional telling a group of pastors I was a part of some years ago not to be too quick to put a spiritual band-aid on every dark night of the soul that sometimes we all feel. He too affirmed that there were times when it's really okay not to be okay, not to feel okay. In fact, he said we should never want anyone who is troubled about injustices that we see in life or the evils that seem to be perpetuated in our community or nation. It's not good to be silent or to resign ourselves to be just disillusioned and to live in despair. Apathy about injustices in life actually, I believe, is worse for the soul than being angry about the inhumanity or the mistreatment of others that we might see going on around us. So I tend to avoid writing prescriptions in sermons like this for the dark nights of the soul. I don't plan today to kick a 60-yard homiletical field goal here at the end of this sermon to somehow save the day. In fact, I've learned from community organizing that's important, at times at least, to get people to express their anger and their frustrations with whatever is unfair or draconian in the public policies, because it takes emotional energy to make changes. Apathy and discouragement rob us of such energy. So if you're feeling discouraged about the shape of our country and the world today, as I often feel myself, I want you to know that you're just not alone, because our values and our principles are what's at stake for us. And we should never let go of our principles and our values, no matter how much others may say that they disagree with them or dismiss them or want to ignore them. The world as it is now, I think we always must recognize, is not the world that our values would suggest it should be. So it's okay, particularly right now, not to be okay with the animosity, the distrust, the inhumanity, the denial, and the clawing for power that we see going on in our social, political, economic institutions today. The question is, what do you say to yourself when the dominant political, social, and cultural voices are winning today and we find our values being ignored or contradicted? As I listen to those who are among the religious, social, and political progressives, I hear a lot of defeatism for understandable reasons. My experience, though, has also taught me that losing is part of life for those who have great dreams, high moral values, and high aspirations. Wise voices have long noted that being defeated is often a temporary condition, while giving up is what makes it permanent. At times when I'm feeling discouraged, I hearken back to my Christian roots and to voices of faith that acknowledge the feelings of defeat and discouragement, as the Apostle Paul did in one of his letters to the early church that was under persecution, when he said, "We're often troubled, but we're not crushed. We sometimes have many doubts, but we don't end up in despair. There are many obstacles that we will have to confront, but we are never without friends and allies. And while we may even be hurt at times, we will not be destroyed because we are carrying within us a spirit of compassion and peace." This isn't just a whimsical hope that the sun will come out somehow tomorrow, but a recognition that it often takes spiritual fortitude to face the challenges that come our way because of our beliefs and our values. We live in a nation that loves winning and winners and hates losing and losers. But as the Austrian poet Rilke suggested to us, the purpose of life often seems to be in the recognition that we will be defeated by greater and greater things. When I hear the results of the voting in Texas or read about the new laws that the Texas legislature has passed, I try to remind myself of the story of the successful entrepreneur he told some years ago about persevering in difficult times. He said that he was reminded of this need to persevere when he went to watch his youngest son play baseball in a little league game. He said he got there a little late and the game had been going on for some time, so he positioned himself along one of the dugouts on the fence there to watch the game as it unfolded. He looked up at the scoreboard and noticed that the score was 47-0. His son's team was doing great. They were up to bat. And while he stood there for the next 10 minutes, they got 9 more runs against the poor team out in the field. He started to feel really bad for the losing team. And suddenly, after some period of time, they managed to get 3 out somehow. And the kids were running off the field. And he was standing there as one of the fielders came running to the dugout. And he said to him, "Wow, you must be feeling discouraged right now." And the young boy said, "Oh, no, sir, not at all. We haven't been up to bat yet. Well, that's one way to look at it. Amid the contentiousness I see going on in today's polarized debates about public policies and where our nation is headed, what we need to be doing, I have to look for ways, for moments sometimes of inspiration, to see people doing the right thing for the right reasons. You have to look for it. You may be surprised sometimes where you find these hopeful moments when you feel that you're not really on the losing side after all. One of my favorite TV programs is the CBS Sunday morning broadcast that usually has a segment by the reporter named Steve Hartman about people across America that he meets who are making a positive difference in their communities and inspiring others to do the same. Somehow, Hartman manages to find week in and week out these heartwarming stories of people who are giving of themselves to make life better for others. I'm almost addicted to his segment. One of the stories that Hartman reported not long ago was about a school bus driver named Curtis Jenkins in a Dallas area school district who's endeared himself to all of the kids who ride his bus to and from school each day. Curtis thinks of all of the kids on his buses as part of his family who need attention, who need support, who need hope. So he asks each kid at the beginning of the school year, as they are getting on his bus, about their aspirations in life. What do they want to become? And he hears the usual sorts of things: doctors, firemen, and policemen. Some say lawyers, many say professional athletes. For the rest of the school year, he goes about reminding them of those stated aspirations and asks them to take responsibility for pursuing their dream. How are you doing on becoming an astronaut? With an infectious smile and joy, Curtis also learns about each of the kids' birthdays, and he's also for years been buying little birthday gifts for each child according to what they need. But when Steve Hartman interviewed some of those kids that ride Curtis's bus, what they like about Mr. Curtis, the gifts that he had given them were never mentioned. Instead, the kids talked about Mr. Curtis's interest in them, his kindness, they said, his understanding when they were down and when they were worried. In one of the interviews, a fifth grade Latino boy said that he thought of Mr. Curtis as a replacement dad, saying, "He's the father that I always wanted when my mother divorced my dad at the age of 4. I learned from a follow-up story from Steve Hartman that Curtis Jenkins' efforts to create what he called a school bus utopia had gotten Curtis a promotion as now a trainer of other school bus drivers in the district on how to turn a routine job into a life-transforming educational experience for children. I look forward every week to that segment by Steve Hartman. I often say to my wife, Michelle, I want Steve Hartman's job. Why do you think I say that? when I am living the dream here in retirement, or so many of us think, why would I say I want Steve Hartman's job? If you know the answer to that question, your soul may actually be in good shape. May it be so.
As we end our service today and extinguish our chalice, take these words by the UU minister, Reverend William G. Sinkford, into your heart and with you in the days ahead. We are a gentle and generous people, but let us not forget our anger. May it fuel not only our commitment to compassion, but also our commitment to make fundamental changes in the shape of our world. Let the vision of the beloved community stand against a vision that would allow the privilege of a few to be accepted as just and even holy. Keep the gospel question, who is my neighbor, before you. Strive always to give voice to the words that gave birth to this nation. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, are seeking to establish justice, pleading for peace, standing up on behalf of the vulnerable among us, promoting the general welfare of our entire nation and the global community, and working to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and for future generations. Take this hopeful vision with you wherever life may take you. Amen.